Tanya.
Yes.
And so our program is this morning. Rabbi is going to give us the thought for the day, and that's going to be speaking about the news, and then I'm going to be in conversation with Lisa. So great pleasure to welcome you all. And
sorry, Rochelle, we missed that because you were muted.
Oh dear, well I didn't. Oh, let's start that again, shall we? So it's a great pleasure to welcome Rabbi Black, who's going to give us thought for the day.
Is that it? Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. That's what we missed. Okay.
I don't think I'm going to go around again.
Okay, we thought we were going to hear the whole thing again. Okay,
yeah.
We're really looking forward to that. Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. And extra special one here, Marlene, all the way from Israel. Wow, wonderful. Lisa, lovely to have you here. Everybody else, lovely. When you put Vayakel Pekudei together, when they are combined, they become the largest Sedra in the Torah with well over 200 verses. But this week, that's not what's happening because we just have Pekudei alone. Most of the Sedra, it speaks about how the Bnei Yisrael collect all the materials for the building of the Mishkan and how the Mishkan was constructed. In addition, we learn a rather interesting item. Moshe Rabbeinu, he personally supervised the collection of all the gold, the silver and the copper, and he exactly directed how the metals and the materials were allocated for the Mishkan's construction. We've heard Moshe, the Prince of Egypt. We've heard about Moshe, the Rayim, the Hemner, the true shepherd, and indeed Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. But this is a new one. Moshe, the greatest man of our people, has now become a Moreh Cheshbon, as we call it in Ivrit. I hope I'm correct, Marlene. An accountant. Hands up. So now you know where you have so many accountants in the Jewish community. They're following Moshe. The question is, here we have the greatest leader that the Jewish world has ever known. Moshe was the one who led the children of Israel out of Egypt from slavery to freedom. He was the one who stood on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving the Torah and speaking to God, panim el panim, face to face. He was a man about whom the Torah says, "V'lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od navi," that there never has arisen in Israel, and there never will arise in Israel a prophet of the stature of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why does the Torah, therefore, have to concern itself with this petty bit of information that Moshe collected from the Bnei Yisrael so many talents of silver and used these to make the hooks for the pillars? The Midrash Tanchuna explains that there were Leitzanei Hador, there were scoffers of that generation who suspected Moshe, God forbid, of pocketing the money for himself, that somehow Moshe was misappropriating funds and using it for his own means. Therefore comes along the Torah and describes how Moshe Rabbeinu goes out of his way to give a proper din v'cheshbon, a precise accounting of the money coming in and the money going out. The question is, why should Moshe have to do that? After all, he's the leader of the generation. There might have been a few Mishagoyim undesirables who thought he might have been embezzling some of the money, but he has to answer to them. The answer is that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu how we should act. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu was Yasher B'nai Hashem. He was upright in the eyes of God and would never have stolen or misappropriated funds. However, he had to be seen also to be Yashar B'nai Adam, upright in the eyes of man as well. Therefore, he had to be seen to give the exact tally of money coming in or out, in order that he should be clean in the eyes of God and in the eyes of man. I believe that in these words, there is an inspiring lesson for us, for all of us. The law of Kal v'chomer, the inference from minor to major, applies here. If in the case of Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the leader of the Jewish people, yet he had to always ensure that he was above suspicion, even though he was far above that, how much more so should we attempt to be clean in the eyes of God and in the eyes of man? Sometimes we use the terminology of frum to describe a person's level of religiosity or observance. An individual is a frum person, means he or she keeps Shabbat, Kashrut, Tarat Mishpacha, davens 3 times a day. That's frum, right? But according to what we have just learned, frumkeit also should mean that a person matzachein v'seichel tov be'einei elokim v'adam. An individual finds grace and good favor in the eyes of God and of man. Indeed, in the Talmud, we find numerous cases where people in positions of prominence had to be extra careful to ensure that they could be trusted. Members of the family of Kohanim in charge of the ketoret, of the incense, would never wear perfume in case they would be accused of using the ingredients of the incense for personal gain. Gabaim, responsible for tzedakah funds, were instructed, according to the Mishnah, to always go around in twos in order that nobody would accuse them of misuse of public funds. But I think there is another important message here as well. We are told in the Torah, in Sefer Shoftim, how the king had 2 Sifrei Torah written for him. One would be put away in the treasury, the other he would always have with him, placed in his arm. The application is that in Judaism, nobody is above the law. The king always walked with the Torah to remind him that even he, the king of Israel, is not above the law. Even our greatest leader, Moshe Rabbeinu, had to give a din v'cheshbon. Just want to wish you all well, because I'm going on a flight tomorrow to New York. I'll be back on Tuesday, please God. Wishing you well, and it's lovely to see you all today. Keep well. Bye.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Black, for your reflections on the Parsha this week, and something that we need to reflect upon. Also, we wish you very well and a safe journey to New York tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Safe journey.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure now to hand over to Leigh Lewis, who's going to give his own take on the news.
Good morning, everybody. 2 weeks ago, when I did this for the first time, I opened my comments with my talk with the comment, this is coming to you from my deep underground in my nuclear bunker. There have been quite a number of stories this week. There's been the story of the rabbi who's in a dispute with his honorary officers in Golders Green. There's been the increase in rail fares. There's been all matter of means, but they all are insignificant to the story that overshadows everything that's happening at the moment. And that, of course, is Putin's insane invasion of Ukraine, something we could never, ever have expected. We never thought he'd do it. But I can't pass comments. I can't tell you anything you don't already know. I can't review the news to tell you what's happening. You've all got the news in front of you. You've all got your opinion. But I think what this has done is made me stand back a little bit to look at something, to look to a group of people that we always give a hard time to, but maybe we should appreciate them maybe a little bit more. And for that, we have to go back to the beginning of December 2019. Because at that time, all the political parties were deep involved in, because on December the 12th, we had a general election. And the Conservatives were canvassing on, mainly under Boris Johnson, on the Brexit ticket. The Labour Party under Corbyn were canvassing against that. And the Jewish community were dreading the result. Thankfully, and even from my part as a staunch socialist, thankfully, the Conservatives won and Corbyn was ousted. And what we expected from the MPs was to get on with running the country, doing the best, delivering Brexit and making the country a better place. And yet within less than 3 months, we were almost nearly 3 months, we were in total lockdown because of COVID, and everything changed. Schools closed, schools closed, shops closed. And running the country became something very different. Everybody had to adapt. It wasn't about the normal policies. The governments, the MPs, had to deal with stuff they had never dealt with before, weren't qualified to deal with. That's not a criticism, that's an observation. They had to deal with things that they had never dreamt they would ever have to deal with. Education when the children aren't at school. How do you mark exams when there are no exams? How do people get to work when they've got a distance from each other? They'd never had to deal with this. And over 2 years, the government have dealt with it, wrestled with it, and we've come through it. We've had the vaccinations. We've come through it. We've been tested and all the rest of it. And as we're coming out of it, and we could look to a future where we could get the politicians could get back to running the country. Putin has this spat of insanity and has changed what should have been a brighter future into almost a war footing, where now even the future of Europe is in doubt because of this madman. We cannot do anything. We can help, but we can't fight. We can't go over and the NATO bombs are not going. The NATO forces are not going to do anything. They're not really allowed to. But it does bring into light as to what these groups of people are. What is NATO if it can't intervene? What good is the United Nations when it just sits and votes and does nothing? When the people of the Ukraine are being murdered, are being starved, are being bombed, we have to reevaluate and have to give a different kind of power to our politicians, to make them aware that we care about other human beings from far away. We maybe should not be so critical about the trivia, rail prices, COVID, Partygate. They're all nothing compared to what's happening. We have to really think about what is important. Human beings are important. And when human beings are being denied their right to live, their right to enjoy themselves, their right just to smile and be happy and play on the streets, we really have to think as to maybe our politicians don't have it so easy. It's not as cushy. And I don't care which party you vote for. As I said, I'm a staunch socialist. But even now, I really dread to think what would have happened if the Labour Party would have been elected. But that's not the issue. The issue is that maybe we should give more support and help to our politicians so they can have the powers to do the right things, so that people, no matter where you are, no matter what country, no matter what colour, no matter what sexuality, can have freedoms that we enjoy in this country and should be enjoyed by everybody in the world. I hope I haven't bored you. I hope I haven't said the wrong thing. Thank you for listening. Good morning, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Leigh, for your wise words. And what you've said is actually so crucial. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same way. So we need to try and reevaluate our life, as it were. Thank you so much. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to be in conversation with Lisa. And what I'd like to sort of begin with is just reflecting on the past few weeks when I've been in conversation with various members of the community. And it's been interesting to observe the varied formative years, how they grew up, perhaps speaking when they were talking about their parents and grandparents. And it was interesting to know how they came to live in Kenton. And of course, many of our members had grandparents and parents for Sholem who were refugees, and a number, of course, fled early on at the turn of the 1900s from pogroms before World War I, and also, of course, during World War II. But very few members can actually trace their full history back to the UK. But I do know one of our members whose great-great-grandparents were living in England from the 19th century. But turning to the situation, some of our members, of course, have not been able to trace any of their relatives, and without revealing too much, it's a great pleasure to welcome Lisa this morning. And I hope that some of you have read her wonderful article that she wrote in Col Kenton, and we're going to be tracing some of her life, with her parents and also, of course, with her grandparents, and finding out a lot more. Now, both Lisa's parents were Holocaust survivors. And Lisa, perhaps you'd like to talk first about your father, and then we're going to speak about your mother, Visholem.
Okay, right. Well, my father's family, Freud, came from Czechoslovakia. My grandfather was called Siegfried Freud, and I think he was a cousin of Sigmund, and because it was sort of similar age, what have you. But I don't really know that part of the family at all. And they fled. They had a shop in Trinek. I don't really know what it sold. I think it was a general store.
Yes.
Anyway, when the Nazis were arriving in Czechoslovakia, they decided to flee, crossed the river, and were told they had the wrong papers and was dispatched to Siberia, which was bitterly cold, but they were actually safe there. The Nazis sent a lot of Jews to Siberia to freeze to death, and they would come back for any remainers later on. But they were actually safe there, and they lived the rest of the war there, and then went to Palestine after the war.
It must have been quite harsh living there.
Yeah, brutally cold.
Because they didn't expect to go there, to end up there, did they?
No, but actually, it was actually, I think, quite a good experience. The Jews actually, stuck together, and they appear later in the story because they actually formed a battalion of the Red Army, marched with the Red Army. So yeah, that was quite interesting. That's how I'll tell you later, it's how my mother met my father. But
yeah. So we'll be looking at that. Yes. Now, you, quite out of the blue, I know you've been trying to trace your family for many years without finding, but then you suddenly got this email. Do you want to tell us about that? That's quite
well, I started really searching. It never really occurred to me about that I'd find stuff on the internet, and then my niece went to Poland with Emmanuel College some years ago, and she came back with this photo that mentioned my uncle and my grandmother by name, and it said that it's in the article, actually. It's a little photograph, and it says that Eliezer Rosshandler, who was my mother's brother, he died in Krosno, the town where they came from, and that my mother's mother died somewhere in Poland, which we believe is Belzec, because I think the Jews of Krosno, the town, were sent to Belzec. But anyway, so there was this photo, and that kind of spurred me on to start looking online. So I joined Jewish Gen, and I've been searching. There's a lot of information about Krosno on there. There's a whole big section about it, and my grandfather's mentioned in there. He was on the Judenrat in the town, and his responsibility was the health of the community, social services. So, I learned little bits, but I would just look for a bit and find very little and get frustrated and give up and, walk away from it and go back a few months. Jewish Gen kept saying they'd added more records. I was hoping there'd be more information, but never really much about my family. And only my grandfather's mentioned, not my grandmother, not my uncle, nobody else. So I sort of resigned myself to not ever finding anything much more out. And then out of the blue, one Tuesday morning in early July, I had an email from a complete stranger who found me on Jewish Gen. I've been on Jewish Gen about 8 years, and I've never heard anything. And this man who isn't Jewish grew up in the town where incidentally, the town my mother came from is called Krosno.
Yes.
It's in southeast Poland. It actually, Krosno means loom, as in weaving. Loom, that's what Krosno means.
So specialised in that.
Yeah, I think there was a big weaving industry around there.
Yes.
I know that they grew flax in that area. I mean, now Krosno's famous for glassware. If you walk into shops like Home Sense and TK Maxx, they sell drinking glasses that say Crosno on them.
Yeah.
I've seen them like several times. I've never bought them, but I've seen them.
Yes. So it
So-
was a bus. It was
Sorry?
quite a bustling town, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Somebody recently sent me a video of life in September 1929, a real bustling town. You know, big market in the square. Very interesting to see footage. And that was September 29. My mother's brother would have been born, but it was before my mother was born. My uncle would have been a toddler, 18 months old at that point. But I was looking at this video and thinking, am I looking at my, you know, grandparents, friends, neighbours? You know, it's just so strange. But it was a really bustling town.
Yeah.
It was known as Little Krakow because the architecture was very similar to Krakow.
And it looks as if it had a large Jewish population
Large
there.
frum Jewish community.
But yeah,
yes,
the frum, yes.
yes.
Certainly that
Yes.
came over really.
Yes, very interesting.
So it could have been that your great grandparents as well were living in that.
They definitely were. My grandfather's parents were called Maya and Rebecca, and they definitely did live there. And they had 8 children. My grandfather was their only son.
Yes.
So seven sisters. Must have been interesting. One sister died as a child at the age of 6. I found her death record. I didn't even know she existed, but I found the record of her death. But yes, but there was a big age range, and like some of the older sisters were already like getting married and having their own children before, when my grandfather was a little boy. And I think there was the Ross handlers in Crosno. There were 2 branches of the family. They were flour merchants in the town, but there were 2 branches, and I don't know anything about the other branch, or you know, the names and how it connects. So that's more research I need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the chap that contacted you, he's got some relatives that were living there, was it? And
well, he was raised there. He's in his 30s. He now lives in Germany.
yes.
But the building where my grandfather's shop was, and the family lived upstairs, he is now a medical centre, and he remembers as a child being taken to the doctors there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is he a sort of historian, or has he just been doing it from out of interest and trying
he's
to find
very
out?
interested in the history of the town, and you know, his research. My grandfather's name kept coming up in his research again and again, and then he found me on Jewish Gen, and that I was looking for information about Samuel Ross Handler. So he contacted me, and I don't think either of us were expecting what came next, really.
It's quite remarkable, really.
Yes, really shocked me.
Yeah, it is really. Because there was also the book as well, wasn't there?
That came later. It started off, he said that my grandfather's name had come up quite a lot in his research. And I said that, you know, he was my grandfather. And I said that my mother survived because she was in hiding. And he wrote back, OMG, I think I found your mother. And he forwarded me an article from a Polish museum, which was the whole story of my mother's hiding. I knew my mother had been in hiding, that she survived the war by being in hiding, but she never mentioned who hid her or who she was hiding with. They were just like grey, shapeless people, you know. I had no idea. It was just like a shadow. She just couldn't. She wanted us to know, but couldn't tell the story. She just couldn't.
Would you like to take us through it? So I know how painful it is, of what happened and
what happened
leading up to that.
Well, the Nazis arrived in Krosno.
That's 41, was it?
That was 1941, and they made their presence known. There was an influx of Jews that came from places like Lodz and Warsaw, because of course the Nazis were already there, and they were fleeing for their lives. So there were extra mouths to feed in Krosno, and tensions were increasing to the point where my mother's parents were very, very worried about what to do. And the Judenrat were told to compile a list of Jews in the town. But because my mother was under the age of 10, her name wasn't yet added to this list. and it was easiest to get her out of any of them. It was, you know, the others, my grandfather was quite a prominent member of the town, and it was much harder for him to just disappear. So they started off by sending my mother. My grandfather knew people who were going to go into hiding, and he begged them to take my mother with them. And
Yes.
they were complete strangers to my mother. My mother was 9 at the time.
Yes.
And so she went off with these people, and I think there were promises that her family will come soon. They'll come soon as they could, but they never came. So she was hiding in the cellar of a farm. These people, this farmer and his wife, they were called Lubas, the family. They were very brave. They were willing to allow 9 Jews to hide in the cellar of their farm and basically saved their lives. And there were times when it was very dangerous and they were nearly caught. And of course, if they had been caught, it would have been death for all of them.
Yes.
But fortunately, that didn't happen. But when the Nazis did get close, which happened several times, the rest of the group that my mother was hiding with, they fled and left her behind. You know, they fled to hide somewhere else, and they just left my mother behind. So the Nazis could easily have found her.
Yes, that's right.
And she was hiding in the dark for weeks at a time on her own. And I find that very hard to forgive, actually, because
I do. Yeah,
I
it's terrible.
She was a child. Who leaves a
Yes.
child like that?
Yeah, I know, extraordinary. Yeah, it was. Very
So
bad.
I mean, there were times when you know, food was very, very scarce. The farmer and his wife were very poor, and the head of the family, the other 8 people my mother was hiding with, they were all somehow related. They were all part of an extended family.
Oh, I see.
And the head of that family the farmer and his wife asked for a bit more money to feed my mother, because they felt she was a child. She had, you know, needs to grow, and she needed some better food, like dairy things, not just
Yes.
like the
Proper
diet of
diet.
bread and potatoes,
Yes.
just a more varied diet to help her grow. And he wasn't willing to pay extra for my mother to have a bit of dairy, and you know, it
Terrible. Yeah.
really quite sad. So yeah, so they were in hiding there for like 3 to 4 years, I think, from like late 41 until basically the end of the war.
Yeah.
And
And
I
how were they
know-
rescued then?
Well, I think the war just ended, then they were allowed to come out.
I see.
Yeah, so I know that she wandered back into Krosno, which had been Judenfrei since December 42.
Yes.
And while she was hiding and she was waiting for her family to come, she was exchanging messages. I think the farmer's wife and his daughter, they all got righteous amongst nation status, and the daughter was sort of like running back and forth and swapping messages. And my
Oh, I
mother was
see.
writing
Wonderful,
home.
yeah.
My mother was writing home that she hated it there and she wanted to come home. And they were telling her, shush, be quiet, don't make a fuss, because they were terrified the farmer would find out.
I
and kick her
doubt.
out.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But anyway, she was writing in Yiddish, and they were Polish, and you know, I don't think that really was a problem, actually.
No.
But then she received a message that her father had been killed.
That must have been a
and-
terrible shock. for her.
Yes, yeah, and she always said to us that he must have served his purpose, and that was it. They decided to get rid of him, but I found out that wasn't what happened.
No.
And then there was just complete silence. That was it. They were gone, and she never heard from them again.
So
yeah.
when she went back to the town, who did she then stay with?
I have no idea. I
Yeah,
really
it's
don't know.
a
I know
shame,
she
no.
went into the town. I don't know if that's when she retrieved her mother's tapestry. I
Yes.
don't know. I'll show you that later. But yes, I know she wandered into town, and she was basically a displaced person. And they gave
Yes.
her the choice of either going into an orphanage or this land army. There was this unit, as I mentioned before, this
Yes.
unit of the Russian army, the Red Army, which was
Yes.
predominantly Jewish. So she went with them, and there she made friends with 2 girls. One girl was called Renee, and Renee and her mother went to America after the war. We went to stay with Renee when I was a teenager. I
you?
remember that, yeah. And then the other girl was called Dahlia, and Dahlia was my father's sister. So
Oh.
that's how they
So-
met.
Met up, yes.
Yes, yeah. So she marched with the Russian army, the Red Army, for a little bit.
Yes.
And then she was found on a list of survivors by family in this country and brought to this country in 1946. So she first of all lived in Chesham. There were two or three branches of my family were living in Chesham. They'd left London and they were living in Chesham, which isn't
Well,
that
that's
far
quite
out.
remarkable that they all lived in the
Yes.
same
Yeah,
place,
two of the family groups were in the same street, just a
Yeah.
few houses apart. So
That's
that's
bizarre,
where she,
isn't it, really?
yeah, she met there was one sister, one of my grandfather's 7 sisters was a sister called Brocha, and she was married here. She got married here and had 2 sons. One was Sam Stamler, who I know that Leigh and Morris knew very well from
Oh,
Wembley
really?
Shore.
Oh, gosh. Small
Yeah.
world.
And yeah, he used to sit in Wembley Shore. There was a family friend, Avon Guz, and across the aisle was Seymour Soloway. So
Oh,
they were all pals at Wembley for
marvellous.
many years.
yeah.
Many years, yes. And then Sam's brother David, who became headmaster at Carmel College for some years.
Very
and-
distinguished, yes.
Yes, and he passed away just as my article came out, unfortunately. I wanted to read it. And
yes.
it's a real shame, but that part of the family were in New York. But when my mum first came to this country, they were living a few doors away.
Yes. So
So-
there's another connection, isn't it, with Michael Dale, I understand?
Yeah, well, David Stamler was
Yes.
a headmaster, a teacher first at Carmel, and eventually became headmaster after Coppell Rosen and before Jeremy Rosen, and he was Michael Dale's teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
He remembers David Stamler at the age of 28 as a teacher there. So
Yeah.
yes, newly married. Yeah. Strange, isn't it? Small world.
It is. Now, do you want to talk about this very impressive tapestry that I've been very privileged to see?
Right, yes. Okay, let me show you, because you've got to see this. I know it's in the article. It's just a little picture, and that doesn't really do it justice. It's massive. I'm going to show the tapestry. Sorry, this is my husband's office, our living room. Right. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, fine, yes.
Hang on, I'm trying to turn it. Yeah. So it's very, very big. Very big. It's like 1.38 meters by 1 meter.
Yes.
Up close, there were like very, very, very tiny stitches. And it's meticulous.
This is
I don't know,
meticulous,
can you
yeah,
see it?
the-
I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Very, very, very small and precise
Stitching, yes.
stitching. And honestly, as a stitcher myself, I appreciate it more now, because I know how the workmanship involved,
Yes.
and it's absolutely beautiful. And somehow my mother managed to retrieve it and bring it to this country, and it's now on my wall.
Yeah.
So there we are. Anyway, right, I'm back. Back in the kitchen. Yes.
So you've
so-
got that sort of in the family, haven't
I mean,
you?
Rochelle
The,
saw it the other night. There are parts of this tapestry where
yes,
the stitches are minute and,
They are.
you know, really
incredible.
detailed, incredible detail. And it
Must
took
take
me
a
2
long
years to
time
make.
to do, actually.
Yeah, 2 years, I think
Yes.
it took to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's
yeah.
very special, really.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So anyway, so this man contacted me in July, and he introduced me to a gentleman who is now 98 years old, lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and he also came from Krosno.
Yes.
And his father and my grandfather were friends, and they were
Oh.
both on the Judenrat together.
That's astonishing as well. That
Yes,
you, yes.
yeah, and apparently my grandfather clashed very badly with the head of the Judenrat, who was a German Jew called Engel, and he used to talk to these Poles in the Judenrat and say, "You people, you people." Well, he was a Jew as well, but he thought he was, as a German Jew, that he was superior.
Oh, I
Well, the
see.
Nazis sent him to Belzec just like all the other Jews, so
Yes.
it didn't make any difference.
No.
But this chap, this 98-year-old man, he lost his whole family in Krosno. The Nazis killed them all, and the last thing his father told him was that if he survives, he must be a mensch.
Oh.
So he became a doctor, moved to America, and had a family, and eventually became a professor of medicine in America. And he couldn't talk about his experiences at all. Just like my mother. My mother couldn't talk about it, neither could he. And his children were always asking, why don't we have grandparents? Why don't we have cousins? And he just couldn't talk about it.
Mm.
And eventually one day he was in the car with his son, and his son pushed again, why don't we have this family? And he started talking about his experiences, and he talked basically for 4 days about the whole thing. And they eventually wrote a book, which I've got here.
Yes.
Whoops, hang on, there we go, called Be a Mensch. This is
Yes.
it. And on this page here, this is a section of Schindler's List, and he survived because he is on that list. But he's a phenomenal man. He's the source of much of the information on Jewish Gen about Krosno.
Yes.
And, we had a very long and very interesting conversation about all of this.
Yes.
Yes, so I'm very grateful that I've had a chance to talk to him as well. He didn't know, but he used to go with his father to my grandfather's shop.
I
And they
see.
used to sit there and talk politics.
Yeah.
But he had no idea that my grandfather had a family at all. And we were
No.
living upstairs. He had no idea. So
It's astonishing. Yes.
yes, yeah, he was a teenager then, so
Yes.
a bit older than my mother and her brother. So he didn't know they existed. Yes.
But actually, to know somebody that actually saw them growing up, you know,
Yeah, I know. It's just
quite phenomenal.
amazing. I can't believe it. I feel like I spent years trying to open a lock, and I had the wrong key, and suddenly
It's all come out.
opened up for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just been a real shock. I mean, I'm pleased, I know, but at the same time,
Yes.
it has been a big shock, very hard to absorb.
To absorb
Yeah.
it all. Yes.
Yeah.
Quite emotionally
Yes,
as well, I think, to take it all in.
very
Yeah.
much so. Very much so. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Have we got any questions from people who have called in today? Oh, Maris.
Yeah,
Maris, go
hi,
ahead.
Yeah, hi Lisa. The tapestry is beautiful. Had your grandmother finished the tapestry? Or
Yes,
did
it
your
was
mother
finished.
finish it?
It
So
was
when your mother
finished.
found it, it was finished.
Yes, and I grew up with it on our living room wall, and I used to look at it. By that stage, I didn't really understand the huge significance of it. I knew that her mother had made it, but I only knew sketchy information about it. I didn't really appreciate it enough. It's only when I started stitching and sort of looked up close. I mean, I still look at it now and see things in a different way, things that I never really noticed before. But you know, so a lot of it is like normal, like tapestry stitch, like tent stitch. But there's some of the details are just incredible. Like there's a statue and like a fountain in it. Tiny stitches. Some of the flowers around are really tiny stitches, and it took her over 2 years, I think, to make. And somehow, I don't know how my mother retrieved it, whether it was with her the whole time, I don't know, but it came with her to England.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
you don't know whether they still had a house there. You don't know whether she found it in her house.
The building where they lived was above the shop, my grandfather's shop, and that building is still there. It's now a medical centre, basically.
Right. But they weren't paid for it or anything. They didn't get any money for it or anything like that.
No. I mean, I don't know who owns that building. I mean, it's very hard to retrieve property from Poland, it's possible that I'm the owner of part of that building. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yes, it could be. I'm about to say, because there haven't been any restitution as far as I'm aware
And
for Poland.
tensions between Poland and Israel, you know, or Jewish
Yes.
community are very, very bad these days. The
Yes.
guy who contacted me, he said he's got 2 cousins who are lawyers. He said, but they wouldn't help me. They wouldn't help me. They, you know, they feel that it's Polish and that's that. You can't have it. End of.
Oh dear. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing story.
it is.
Mm.
Can I
We've got
say
another
something?
question. Yeah, go
Yeah.
on, Roy.
It's not to Lisa, it's to everybody that's listening, really. I've enjoyed getting this series going, but I'm running out of people.
Oh,
If anyone on this call would like to be interviewed, have a chat with Rochelle, I'd love to hear from you. So you can either put your hand up now, or you know how to get in touch with me. Otherwise, won't be able to continue because I just can't find enough people.
yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Roy, for giving us a plug. So good. Let's hope some more people come forward. Yeah. Thank you. We got any more questions for Lisa? No?
No.
No. Well, Lisa, I want to say thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure, really. Because as I
Amazing story.
said
Amazing talk.
to you,
Amazing
because
talk.
my father, Shalom, I don't know, his relatives died in Auschwitz. He never talked about it, and that's something that, you know, I'll never find out, though I am trying. But so thank you very much.
Jewish
Again.
Gen,
Yes, right.
Gen, and also they will link you. You'll see links to other countries where you might be able to find things out.
Yes.
It's worth trying. It's worth digging, because honestly, I have spent years searching and I couldn't find information. And the reason I couldn't find information is that when my mother was in hiding, her father was destroying all their papers so that they could come to her and all disappear. That was the plan. That's
Yes,
why
I understand that.
find
Yes.
birth records, their marriage records. I can't find any of that, and that's why, because they were deliberately trying to hide. And unfortunately, they never got out of there. They never got out of Krosno. My grandfather was murdered because he, as a gesture of goodwill, he gave a case of this homemade apple wine to the Gestapo for maybe a Christmas party, late December 41. I don't know, I'm guessing. And an SS officer objected to seeing these soldiers drunk, so he walked down the street and he blasted my grandfather dead with a shotgun, just like that. That's what happened to my grandfather. And then, you know, there was just silence, so I can only surmise what happened. I believe that my grandmother was sent to Belzec, because that's where most of the Jews went, but I can't confirm it. I've tried everything. Arrowson archives don't have anything. But keep looking. If you know you have family over there, start with Jewish Gen and find your country's records, because things are out there. You just have to dig and play about with spelling. I mean, Goldberg, you probably won't have to play around with spelling. I had to play around with spellings a bit, but they're there. Information is out there. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been inspirational, I must say. And I'm so delighted that you've actually found the link by this chat, really.
Yes, it's been incredible. It really has been amazing. Yes. Thank you very much
for sharing your experience as well. And also, it must be very painful as well. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, a bit.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Also,
Lisa.
Amazing talk. Thank you, Lisa.